Good afternoon and welcome to The Count, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin Almanza and this is my co-host Alana Sivan. It is Monday, October 20. It's not Monday. Oh my goodness, y'all. It's Tuesday, October 27th. We're 1 week out from the election. And that just shows you where my headspace is. I'm talking to all of you on the internet, hundreds of thousands of people, and I don't even know what day it is. Perhaps it's just the telescoping down of election time as we are 1 week out from the end of voting. We're not calling it election day because, as you all know, the election is happening right now. It has been happening. It's been happening for quite some time. And we are seeing absolutely crushing historic levels of turnout. It is tremendously exciting. Nearly 70 million ballots have been cast at this point, blowing the entire 2016 early vote count right out of the water. 50% of the 2016 vote total has already been cast. And if turnout continues at this rate, we are looking to potentially pass 150 million voters. Now, I don't know if y'all remember back in 2008, President Obama brought out tremendous excitement. He got 131 million people out to vote for President Obama. He held this recent turnout record, but we are looking now, if we keep it up at this rate, at possibly hitting 65% voter turnout, which would be the highest turnout in over 100 years. So this is a show that is technically about that, about the election, about how to make sure your voice is heard and your vote gets counted. But it's also a show about plans within the GOP and within the Trump campaign, and now maybe within the Supreme Court, to subvert the will of the people, to co-opt democracy, and to secure 4 more years or more of minority rule for an illegitimate government.
Emily, I'm having a hard time believing that we only have 7 days left until this election. That means we have 7 days to bring this home.
You're just rubbing in the fact that I got the date wrong.
No. I'm just bringing home the point that there's so much to do in such little time. And particularly for the 70 million people who've already cast your ballots, you've done step 1. There are so many other things to do, and now is the time to do them, because Emily and I do not want to be on this show in 8 or 9 days talking about how we have to start the revolution. So we're very excited today because we have a special guest with us who is eager to tell us what we can all be doing in this home stretch to make sure that we are not in that position. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is a U.S. representative from Washington's 7th Congressional District and the first South Asian American woman ever elected to the House of Representatives. She's a lifelong organizer. She serves as co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, where she's made a name for herself as a champion for access to health care, humane immigration reform, workers' rights, economic opportunity, racial justice, and equality. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Congresswoman, we are going to dive into we are so excited that you're here to talk about constructive, positive things, because so much of this show is just us scaring people. But before we get started, we have to give our viewers their daily dose of the shudders. So we just had a new confirmation to the Supreme Court. We also had a pretty significant concurrence come out last night. Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence in the Wisconsin ballot case. I'm wondering if you could just kick us off by responding to what you see happening right now in the Supreme Court and how it's relating back to the Trump campaign.
Well, it was absolutely horrific. I mean, the Republicans, instead of doing anything on COVID relief when we have 223,000 people dead, 8.5 million people with the infection, only surging across the country, they rammed through an illegitimate process. There was no process here. There was no opportunity for people to really dive into Amy Coney Barrett's history to make sure that the American people understood. And let's recognize this was 1 week before the election when President Obama was in office and he nominated Merrick Garland. You remember that all the Republicans came up and threw up their hands in horror and said 8 months before the election that Merrick Garland couldn't be appointed. So hypocrisy, illegal process, and completely destructive to our court system. So there's that. Then there's, and I know we're going to get into positive constructive things, but you asked me, so I'm going to give you your daily dose here. Then there is the Kavanaugh concurrence with the Supreme Court opinion on Wisconsin. And what stunned me in that concurrence is that he is essentially saying the state has an interest in making sure that ballots are not counted in order to prevent the perception of a rigged election. That is setting us up. It's much of the language that Donald Trump has used. It is extremely scary, and it comes on the heels of another important decision that the Supreme Court made. In this case, it upheld a decent verdict for us. This was in Pennsylvania around ballots and ballot counting, but it was a 4-4 tie. And Roberts sided with the other side. But the rationale of the 4 conservative judges in that was actually that the state had an interest in essentially interpreting and overturning the state Supreme Court's views on things that the legislature, the state constitution. So this is now a direct incursion into states that have set our own, we've had mail-in balloting for many, many years. We're one of the oldest states in the country to have mail-in ballots. And our state Supreme Court, our legislature has said you can count the ballots as long as they are marked up till the day of the election. The last postmark has to be the day of the election, but those ballots get counted. That's true in California as well. That's up to the states. And now the Supreme Court is saying that they have the right to interpret that state legislature overturn decisions that the state Supreme Court is making on state legislative issues. That is also extremely troubling with an Amy Coney Barrett. And so I think people just have to understand why not only these 7 days is so important for a decisive early victory, because now the courts in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court has said that ballots that come in after the election in Wisconsin can't be counted. That means you got to go now and you got to drop your ballot in a ballot box or directly with the elections folks, or in person, in order for your ballot to count in the state of Wisconsin. So not only is that important, but also all of the things we're going to talk about following the election, and also the reforms that we're going to have to make if we want justice to actually work as justice and for people to have faith in the courts.
Congressman, I'm glad you talk about how in your state, the state has been able to receive ballots that are postmarked on election day and everything works fine. And so it sort of refutes this whole notion that Donald Trump has been sowing, which is that you cannot trust those ballots, which is ludicrous. And I'm glad we have Congress members like you who are willing to refute that in your state.
Well, I refuted it with Bill Barr during a hearing because he kept pushing that point. And I entered for the record the fact that MIT did a study that looked at the 250 million ballots that have been cast over the last 20 years, absentee ballots that have been cast. And the fraud rate they found was, are you ready for this? I wish we could have like a screen that could put this up, 0.00006%. So 4 zeros before the 6%. And by the way, we have a Republican Secretary of State that administers our mail-in system at this point. She's being challenged, but this is a state where we have had Republicans and Democrats understand that voting is good for democracy, that the more votes you can get people to give, whatever those votes are, that is actually the definition of democracy. And so I think this is very important to remind people. And by the way, Donald Trump votes by, drum roll please, absentee ballot.
And I'm told he votes in Florida, which I'm told actually his Mar-a-Lago property is not zoned to be private residence. So
there
just
you go.
saying that he might,
Right.
I don't know. I'm gonna pull a very Trump thing. I don't know what's happening there. Might be fraud. I don't know. People
Very
are talking about
interesting.
it. People are
Very
saying.
interesting.
A lot of rabbit holes to go down.
Okay, I have one more question for you. Congressman, I know you've been keeping a close eye on the early voting numbers that we've mentioned at the top. And I see that your state of Washington has already cast 2/3 of their entire 2016 total, which is super exciting. Can you give us your reaction to what we're seeing and tell us what it says about what needs to happen over the next 7 days?
Well, first of all, I have to say, I'm just so proud of our state. I'm so proud of the fact that we've got this down. We understand that democracy matters, regardless of who you vote for, your vote matters. But then, of course, this moment, right? I mean, we are seeing across the country more young people turning out and voting than we've seen in previous elections, more folks of color, Latinx voters in Pennsylvania. I mean, places that understand the threat that we are in right now with the Donald Trump presidency, a Supreme Court that has been driven towards ideology instead of towards justice, and all of the different ways in which Mitch McConnell and Republicans have destroyed our Constitution, our sense of balance of powers. And so I think that is what is driving people. People understand that America is different than Donald Trump and different than Mitch McConnell. And they understand too that we're all going to have to work very hard, not only between now and the election, but after the election, because some of the things that Republicans have put in place, like the Supreme Court, are going to require a rebalancing. And if Donald Trump tries to seal this election and it ends up going to a Supreme Court that has 3 of his nominees on that court, who have over and over again parroted things that Trump has said that undermine the very notion of democracy, then we will have on our hands a situation that America has not had to deal with, but other parts of the world have. And, the road to fascism is littered with moments when people did not stand up or speak out. And we cannot allow that to happen in the United States of America. And we have to be ready for that, not only with our legal challenges, not only with our media response, but also with the street response of how people put themselves on the line. And there's been a lot of great work from progressive organizing groups, helping people to be trained in nonviolent civil disobedience, really taking lessons from places like Sudan and other parts of the world where we've had dictators who have tried to take over power, and the people have had to be involved in an extremely difficult fight. I hope that is not the case. I just want people to understand that if we want to keep our democracy, we're going to have to fight for it.
It's a powerful note to close on. Representative Jayapal, I know you have to go, and I'm trying to be a responsible timekeeper for you. But we're so thrilled to have had you join us here. And thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck over the next 7 days. And we look forward to seeing you on the other side, or hopefully this show won't be necessary and it won't exist anymore.
It'll always be necessary because we'll have to continue to push for great reforms. But listen, stay safe, wear a mask, and vote, vote, vote. Don't leave anything on the table between now and the election. The day after the election, I want everybody to be able to wake up and say to themselves when they look in the mirror, I did everything I could. I put it all out there. So thank you both so much for everything that you do and for helping to bring attention to this.
Right back at you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So, I mean, I want to just I'm going to be talking about, I feel like I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that Representative Jayapal just said. Knocked off my microphone. I'm having a great show, Alana. I'm having the best.
You are. You're having a wonderful show. And there are so many things that she said that I want to hear you talk about.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is that she raised the Kavanaugh question and the Amy Coney Barrett question. I'm not going to call her ACB unless we can call him FBK for frat boy Kavanaugh. I'm just like, that. If we're giving people monikers, I think it could get rather undignified. I'm
saying FBK from now on, but I will not say ACB.
But I mean, what's interesting is it really, all of it, every new ingredient that gets mixed into this chaos cake. Now we have a completely politicized Supreme Court. Now we have a justice who is signaling his willingness to parrot, as she said, Trump's claims that mail-in ballots, which he himself uses, are somehow not, secure. And what's interesting to me is that right now, the only people who can stop all of this corruption machine from happening are voters, phone bankers, people driving their families to the polls, donating to get out the vote efforts, dancing and, to keep people entertained in line, volunteering, as I myself I'm going to be volunteering to help cure ballots this week. I mean, we the people are the only people who have a shot at disrupting this corruption machine. And at this point, given what we've heard, and we're going to be talking about this a lot in the show, we the people are going to have to do it ourselves in person.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right, because we see how the conservatives at this point and those who are anti-democracy at this point are doing everything that they can to stop votes from being counted, and completely, just like the Congresswoman said, are reiterating the language that Trump has put forward. So I just want to pull this one quote that FBK put in his decision, where he wrote that having too many ballots, quote, flown in after Election Day can cause chaos and suspicions of impropriety. This is Trumpian. This is Trumpian to say that having mail-in ballots that are postmarked the day of election but come a few days later cause chaos. And by the way, they're coming a few days later because of what? Donald Trump's attack on the Postal Service.
Yeah.
And so we see how, and especially now with Amy Coney Barrett being on the Supreme Court, like, this is scary.
Yeah. I mean, so reflecting now that we're in the Kavanaugh conversation, which I think we are going to be talking about more in other episodes, but just to since this just happened last night, I think it's really worth delving into for a second. What's so disturbing to me is that you've got the American people generally, and Justice Kagan specifically, reiterating that we count ballots until we get a result. But you've got a Supreme Court justice and the Trump campaign basically saying, we're gonna, go with this game day result. That's, you remember, that's the Bannon idea of this game day result, which is, by the way, not actually a result. There are exactly 0 states who officially call their election result on election day. Now, in the past, in less complicated elections, there have been states that have made projections of who they thought was going to win. But this idea that the norm is for states to have a result on election day is completely false. There are 0 states who expect to this year or have in prior years had any kind of actual result on election day. Obviously this year, because of Louis DeJoy, because of the dismantled postal system, because of all of this, is dramatically different from past years. And yet you have FBK and the Trump campaign saying, we're going to pick this result, and if counting those votes changes what we picked, we're just not going to count them, because that's, if it changes the results, it must be fraud. I mean, that is an argument so ludicrous, it would not pass in a 4th grade classroom. And yet we have it determining the outcome of one of potentially the most important election in American history to date.
Which, for many reasons, is why I would encourage folks to vote early, which is something that in person, vote early in person, which is something Emily and I both did. I just did this weekend, and I want to talk to you all about it. And we have a video that we've put together for you to watch. Let's play it.
Hi everybody, I am off to vote. We're super excited about it. We live in New York City and have heard that the lines are quite long according to social media. So I am coming with a bag fully prepared. The bag is filled with granola in case we get hungry, a Kindle to, read, water, and, our giraffe with the glasses on it, umbrella just in case it rains, and a blanket in case we get cold or if we can't stand standing anymore and just want to plop and sit down on the ground. We're ready. We're going to go vote. I'll take you with me.
It was a good taco.
We're on about our last block of this line right now. We've been having some fun. We had some tacos. We played heads up with some of our neighbors online. It could be worse. finally voting. Also, shout out to my fiance who's had a foot issue this whole time and been waiting online. Okay, so all I did was give them my first and last name, and then I signed something. They printed out my ballot for me, and they told me to go to a booth, so that's where I am now, and I am going to vote here at my booth. And this is the little booth they have for me. All right. What is it, 3 hours later? 3 hours later?
That was a while.
It was a while. We voted, we're done, we feel good, and we have stickers. Took way too long, but hey, we're here.
So I have a few things to say about this experience. First of all, I had a blast. Like, I'll just say I had a blast. I waited on a really long line. I know we said 3 hours, but it was actually 4 hours once I thought about it. We got there 11:45, left at 3:45. We had a blast because the energy was positive. There were a lot of local leaders there who were trying to keep spirits up, who were making sure that people who were seniors or who had disabilities, if they needed to get to the front of the line, they could. There were the amazing tacos. I asked for a vegan one. They gave me a vegan one. That was great. We made friends with people on the line and we're playing charades with them. So it was all fun. But ultimately, and we've discussed this a lot on this show, the long lines are a problem. And just because we're living in a blue state doesn't mean that the problem isn't serious and doesn't mean that it doesn't result from years of voter suppression. I think that our state legislature has done a good job in the past few years, but sort of the context of New York is prior to, I believe it was 2017, we had a Republican-controlled state legislature, Republican and this small group of, they were called the Independent Democratic Conference, who would caucus with the Republicans, who prevented early voting from happening for several years. And so this was our first general election with early voting, our first general election in a pandemic with a lot of mistrust in the Postal Service. And so had we had more years to sort of prepare for this early voting, this year could have been different. And so I say that to say that the impact of voter suppression it's not limited. It lasts for years. And so that's something that we need to think about in this election and sort of all the things that are happening around the country to suppress the vote and the long-term impact that that's going to have. Another thing I want to comment on too is that in New York, this is a really good thing. You don't have, if it's not your first time voting, you don't have to give your ID. So it was really easy once I got inside to be able to just sign my name and give them my first and last name, and that was it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But it was, we had a lot of fun, to be honest. Maybe it's because I've been inside most of the time and I got to, hang out with people and listen to music and,
You've been so pandemic quarantined that you are enjoying voter suppression, but also like the sense of community connection that this hardship is. I mean, it's hard, right? To talk about people making joy out of hardship. That is what we're seeing here. One does not want to endorse the hardship, but one does want to celebrate the joy.
And it's also local leaders stepping up too. Like, I saw a lot of great district leaders, state committee people who were there making sure, council members all making sure that like people were taken care of. And that's really important. And I think that's sort of a really good example of how in the face of suppression, leaders can stand up. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, both in the community and in office.
Yeah. So, okay, we said at the top that to protect everybody from frat boy Kavanaugh, we're going to have to do a lot more in person. And Alana, you did your part. You masked up, you sanitized up, you brought a picnic, you got your giraffe water bottle, you got a blanket, and you went there. A lot of people are not planning to go there, but a lot of people have mail-in ballots that now might not make it in time. Mm-hmm. And of course, you just pointed out a really interesting quirk of New York, right? Which is the ID thing. Every state has different rules, and we don't have the capacity or the expertise right now to sit here and go through 50 states' rules. But I think we should definitely move into a discussion about, oh, you know what? Wait a minute. Do you want to see one more fun thing before we go into the really hard discussion of like mail-in voting? Do you want to see one more really
Always.
fun thing?
Yes, please.
All right. I just was told, I was reminded that we have one more celebration video to show people before we do the hard work of figuring out how to protect your ballots against Frat Boy Kavanaugh. Can we play that next clip, that joyous clip?
I love it.
See, now I really am glad that we were able to play that, Alana, because it totally underscores what we were saying about local leadership, right? Like there's a local DJ in Philly who was on hand to turn the line into an impromptu dance party with volunteer dancers and people joining in. And like Philly is one of the most important cities in this entire election. And the amount of energy that is going into making people able to get through what they've got to get through in order to be heard is such a beautiful act of community leadership. So I'm glad we took a minute to celebrate that.
It's so important because in this time, like we gotta celebrate the small moments and the things that leaders are doing to step up. Like that group of people, amazing. And so, but let's get back to this less amazing thing that we have to talk about, which is how to make sure that your ballot is protected from FBK. So for our final segment today, we're going to go into a deeper dive into how you can make sure that your ballot counts. As we all know, we've seen an unprecedented surge in mail-in ballot voting this year. There have been 90 million requests for ballots across the country. And according to Counts Today, more than 25 million mail-in ballots have already been returned. That means that there are a lot of ballots still out there. Now, you may have, and I did this, ordered an absentee ballot and then decided, no, instead I'm going to vote in person. Or, and if this is you, don't do that. You have decided that you're not going to vote or you're waiting until the last minute. Don't do either of those things. Boo to those things.
Save the rest of us the drama. Save yourself the drama. We don't want the drama of all of these late ballots causing a crisis.
None of that.
Mm-mm.
But, you know, we should talk about sort of the issue of how we can make sure those ballots are counted. So, Emily, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
So just because someone returns a ballot does not mean that ballot will be counted, because democracy is the enemy here. There are lots of reasons that mail-in ballots can be tossed. As we remember, hanging chads and pregnant chads, well, there are the equivalent of those today in every state and jurisdiction across the country. More than 300,000 mail-in ballots were rejected in the 2016 election. And if you remember the margins of the 2016 election, like that is a decisive amount of votes. So more than 500,000 mail-in ballots were rejected in this year's primaries. According to estimates, more than 1 million ballots could be thrown out this year, which is appalling. And that is tens of thousands or more in critical battleground states that could decide the outcome of this election. So it's not actually enough this year just to vote. One has to vote expertly and with enormous care and in a way that sidesteps all of the obstacles and hazards that are being placed in front of the American voter. I think someone tweeted the other day that like you've got to stand in line for 40 hours and fight a pterodactyl to vote in the United States. And that really is what we're looking at. And with the razor-thin margins of victory that we've seen in recent elections, these rejected ballots make a huge difference. So we looked at the New York Times, which recently published an analysis of the top reasons ballots were rejected in 2018. Can we take a look at what they found?
So when we look at this analysis, the three key voting blocks that overwhelmingly support Joe Biden are most likely to have their ballots flagged and rejected. So we're talking young voters, Black and Latinx voters, and new mail-in voters. So today, we have to talk a little bit more about how to make sure your ballot counts. So first thing, again, if you're still hanging on to a mail-in ballot, do not put your ballot in the mail. I'm going to say that one more time. Do you have a mail-in ballot? Don't put it in the mail. Instead, make sure that you put it in a drop box or vote early in person instead. Keep in mind, though, if you vote early in person, different states have different requirements when you've already requested an absentee ballot. Some states will require you to bring that ballot with the envelope and surrender it. Other states, you can just go in and vote, even if you've already ordered an absentee ballot, and then they won't count the absentee ballot, or they'll cancel the absentee ballot. So there are different rules in different states, so make sure you're looking up at your state's website, your county clerk's website, to make sure that you know those rules.
And if you're like me and you're just like kind of lazy and messed up, this is literally what happened to me. I went to vote in person, as y'all saw. And when I got there, the person checking me in said, "Hey, we sent you an absentee ballot." And I said, "Oh, imagine that." And they said, "Just when you get it, just take it to the town clerk's office and hand it in." I did that today. I went to the town clerk's office and handed it in. Just so you know how confused everyone is, I got to the town clerk's office and they were like, "You didn't need to hand this in. Why are you here?" I was like, "Look, whatever, just take it off my hands. I don't want to be responsible for this mess anymore." But the point is, whatever you're doing, check your local rules. And at this point, the mail is not your friend. At this point, the mail is not going to get there. So don't use the mail if there's any way to avoid it. But before we even get to the point of putting something into a Dropbox or into the hands of someone working for your local election official, we need to make sure that that ballot is going to fly, right? We got to make sure that your ballot's not going to get rejected. Every T has to be crossed, every I dotted, every signature matched perfectly, because they are going to be looking for excuses to throw out ballots and litigating over that. Let's not give them any excuses. Let's make our ballots freaking perfect. So this all starts with the writing utensil you choose. So some states are more strict than others. If you can use standard black or dark blue ink, you're in good shape. To be safe, don't use a marker, don't use a Sharpie that can bleed through the paper, don't use a fun color. They don't like fun colors. These are not fun people. So what you're going to want to do is like take a Bic or a regular ballpoint pen, no need to get too fancy, and use that to fill out your ballot. Step 1, use the right weapon.
Step 2, once you've decided who or what you're casting your vote for, make sure to mark your selection very clearly with this black or blue pen. It's worth double checking the ballot before marking it to make sure you know which box, which bubble to fill out. No stray marks. We want to make sure that you don't have any stray marks that confuse anybody or anyone who's reading these ballots. And after you're done filling in your ballot, it's time to sign your name. Now, this is not time to do all sorts of new things. It's not time for your schoolgirl signature with the hearts and the bubble eyes or anything like that. Have a signature that matches what's likely on your voter registration. Look on your driver's license if you have one to see what's on that, to make sure that it matches what is on your voter registration.
Yeah, we talked about this actually in an earlier show, and I mentioned that my dad just had shoulder surgery on his dominant arm. For somebody who is going to be unable to perfectly replicate your signature, like that's a really good reason to go in person right there, to get guidance in person day of, to make sure that you don't let anything stand in your way to doing this perfectly. Okay, so once you've gotten your signature perfectly matched, take a look at the ballot and see exactly what information it needs from you in terms of your contact information. Why is this important? If you're like me, you assume that anytime you give people contact information, they're going to try to sell you things. That is not the case here. The reason they need your contact information is if there's anything wrong with your ballot, they need to be able to contact you to give you a chance to cure your ballot. Curing your ballot means fixing the problem, like a mismatched signature or a stray mark, or if you scroll like something in the margins, like don't do that. But if you do, they want to give you a chance to fix it. So if you filled out your phone number, your mailing address, your email, whatever that form requests, now it's time to get your ballot ready to go out the door. This is where we get back to talking about naked ballots and security envelopes and all these other things that some states require. So for example, Pennsylvania requires that you put that ballot into a secrecy envelope, which they give you, before you put it in another envelope like you would to mail it or whatever. So check your state's requirements, make sure that using the right papers and envelopes surrounding your ballot in the right order. It's like a Russian nesting doll. It's the ballot in the envelope, in the other envelope, in your bag, in your car, to the place. So some states also require a stamp on the outer envelope, but then again, we're talking about not using the mail. So let's just avoid that entire conversation and go drop that bad boy off in person.
In terms of locations, also, there's a website called iwillvote.com. If you have Spanish-speaking relatives, there's also a Spanish version called voyavotar.com. I was about to say .com, but and it will provide you with drop-off locations and other information that you need, and it's specific to your state as well. And so when your ballot is ready to deliver, go on that site, see where your site is. And after you do that, you'll also want to figure out how to track the status of your ballot so you can confirm as soon as it's been received. Each state has its own resources. So honestly, the best thing you can do is go to Google and say how to track the status of my ballot along with your state. And that should direct you to the right place. But again, voting early in person is the best way to do it.
Yeah, putting that into someone's hand is really a reassuring feeling. I will also say that even though you're giving them your contact information to contact you if there's a problem with your ballot, a way to double check that the bureaucrats are doing their jobs is to track your ballot. Make sure it was received. Some states will even let you know when it's, cleared and counted. If you follow the directions we just gave you, and you don't do anything really wild that we were not smart enough to think of in advance, you should be fine. If you do these things, your vote should be counted. So what if something goes wrong? What if you did everything right and I don't know, a bird pooped on the envelope and it leaked through and now they're there's markings on the ballot? What do you do if your ballot gets rejected? The first thing to do, call up your county election office and ask for help. They're supposed to give you help. If you've sent the ballot and it hasn't been received for some reason and you're tracking it and you're looking for it, they might still let you show up in person on election day and fill out a provisional ballot, which is a ballot that will count, if your other one isn't received. It's not the same as a regular ballot, but it's still better than not doing anything. If your ballot has been received and got rejected for some reason, some states have what we just mentioned, which is known as a cure process. That's where you give the voter a chance to correct any issues that they had in filling out the ballot so that that ballot can still be counted. I mentioned a minute ago, I will be volunteering as a cure advisor to people on the phones in the week leading up to election day so that you can call someone, get someone on the phone, get help, and they will walk you through how to fix your ballot and make it perfect. Some states don't have that process. So that can mean that if voters make a mistake, they might not find out that their ballot didn't count until after the election, if ever, which is why it's so important to do it really, really carefully the first time.
And the cure process could end up being really critical in states like North Carolina, where recent data has shown that, I'm reading this right now, about 61% of rejected mail-in ballots that need to be fixed belong to Democrats. And this is compared with 18% of Republicans and the rest for unaffiliated voters. And data also shows that mail-in ballots cast by Black voters have been rejected at a disproportionately high rate. And because Black voters have been less likely to vote by mail in the past, many are doing this for the first time and may be unfamiliar with the very specific requirements, including one that requires a witness to fill out information verifying that they watched the voter complete the form. So that means they need to have someone there to verify, to say that, hey, you actually did fill out this form, which seems like a pretty onerous requirement.
I remember I saw a tweet from a very prominent Black intellectual last week who was helping a family member fill out a mail-in ballot. And he tweeted that his wife was telling him that he should do a practice one first, just to make sure he got it right. And he was like, I have a government degree from Harvard. I'm a lawyer. And she's like, yeah, Republicans are sneaky. So it's not you, it's that the ballots are probably sneaky in some way, and you just have to dodge those obstacles. So let's talk about North Carolina. In North Carolina, there's a special requirement, the witness requirement. Voters who don't send in ballots with witness information, for example, may need to fill out a new ballot with a properly filled out witness section. That's a curable issue, but you've got to be paying attention to have time to fix it this late in the game. Many voters will need to be told, for example, that there's an issue with their first ballot that they're going to have to fix. There are going to be ongoing legal challenges. There's been constant litigation already during this election. And the ballot curing process in that state wasn't resolved actually until a couple of weeks ago. So state officials couldn't start informing. First of all, state officials were still confused about the rules. And then once they figured out the rules, they had very little time to start informing voters that they had to fix their ballots with this witness requirement. The good news, again, we're going back to community leadership. So groups like Common Cause and Next Gen America have assembled teams of volunteers to reach out to voters whose ballots have been rejected and let them know what they can do to fix it, how to fix it, where to go next, how to make your ballot count. If you've already voted and you are looking for a way to make a real difference, that's another great form of volunteerism that you can do is looking up Common Cause or Next Gen America and reaching out to help others make sure their vote doesn't get stolen.
And please, 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 again, those groups, Next Gen and Common Cause. Next Gen America and Common Cause, because one of the most painful things that could happen in this election, just like the Congresswoman said earlier, is waking up the day after Election Day and knowing that you could have done more, but also waking up after Election Day, or perhaps even a week after Election Day, and knowing that the reason why this election didn't turn out the way it should was because of technical errors. And so it's really important that as many people get involved as possible in making sure that they cannot reject ballots, because the more votes that the GOP can reject, the better odds of them winning. And the fewer people who participate in democracy, the easier it becomes for them to advance their undemocratic agenda and subvert the will of the people, which is something that they've been trying to do for way too long. And we can't let them win this way.
Yeah, I mean, when the people don't agree with your agenda, your only choice is to somehow silence the people. Mm-hmm. So we have to not let ourselves be silenced, which is such a depressing place to be in a nation that has been, cast in certain ways as the leader of the free world. Here we are fighting pterodactyls to vote. Like it's, the fact that we've had to spend so much time, Alana, you and me, like talking through the details of the bureaucracy on how to vote is the perfect example of how the GOP has like weaponized bureaucracy to silence people, to hold them down, especially people who don't agree with them. I mean, rejecting 1 million votes for things like the signature not perfectly matching or the wrong pen. I very rarely think things should be crimes, but like that feels criminal. That feels like you are robbing a population of its right to self-governance.
Right. And rather than it being criminal, what ends up happening is you have folks like Steve Bannon who are out there saying, it's your fault for not using the right pen. It's your fault for not filling out the right bubble. It's your fault for not risking your health during a pandemic or risking the ability to take care of your children because you have to wait for 4+ hours on a line to vote. It's all your fault, voters, for not being able to jump over all of the hurdles that we have placed in front of you. And it's unfortunate that we live in this world where that's what we have to do in this quote unquote democracy in order to make sure that our voices are heard. But alas,
or else Brett Kavanaugh is going to say, I don't know, you military service person serving your country and putting your life on the line overseas, your ballot was a day late. So I just don't think you get a say in this country.
Right. And something that and just one more thing that I want to say about that Kavanaugh decision, the FBK comments, is that his sort of narrative that he talks about, where he says that having too many ballots, he essentially says too many ballots being counted causes chaos. That's what he says. And first of all, that's not true, but let's assume that it is true. If that's true, sorry, democracy is a little bit messy. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to just use your autocratic ideologies to be able to say, hey, autocracy is cleaner. It's less messy.
I mean,
that's just not how it works.
Yeah, no, it's pretty appalling, right? Like too many votes to count. And there's too many people here. Like, sorry, this is who we are. This is the way it is on our government to make that counting work. It is not on the voter to jump through 4,000 hoops to create less chaos for their local government. It is on the government to make there be enough polling places and simple procedures and make voting easy and, something that you don't have to sacrifice your job to do. It is on, in fact, the Brett Kavanaughs of the world, the judges, the leaders, the legislators, to tamp down the chaos. They've chosen to amp it right up and then blame voters for being awash in this chaotic world they've created and are going to leverage to try and steal an election.
But I'm really excited because we have a conversation that will happen tomorrow that will tell us why that mindset is so wrong, especially on the Supreme Court. So Emily, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so tomorrow we've got such an exciting show. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got Senator Chris Murphy joining us tomorrow, and Leah Littman, who you may remember from last week. She is from the Strict Scrutiny podcast and a Supreme Court expert. So tomorrow's show is going to be absolutely juicy. You can find us back here 4 p.m. This has been another episode of The Count. I'm Emily Galvan Almanza. This is Alana Sivan, and we will see you tomorrow.